Well, Hannah Porter is a journalist who has worked extensively in the Middle East, and including in Yemen. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. It seems to be another escalation and dozens of deaths, as we've just heard. Does it show once more that this is a war that seemingly gets more and more brutal, and even a prison or a detention center was targeted?
Absolutely. This airstrike is simply the latest example in the gross incompetence that the Saudi-led coalition is guilty of. They've repeatedly demonstrated in the last 4.5 years an absolute disregard for the lives of civilians and the lives of non-combatants, and a disregard for international law. It's important to point out here that the coalition may claim that these airstrikes were justified because this facility was possibly used to store weapons, or that these prisoners were being used as human shields by the Houthis. This rhetoric should completely be rejected because, as has been pointed out, the Red Cross was aware that this was a prison, as was the coalition, and there was just no justification for this site to have been targeted.
Dozens of deaths, and that's an eyewitness account from Franz Rachenstein. From your sources, whether that's in quieter areas or in fighting areas of Yemen, how are ordinary people coping after 4 years of war?
They're not coping well. Not only have they lost loved ones and friends, but they've lost their livelihoods. Many are starving to death. It's hard to imagine the situation being worse, but the situation will absolutely get worse if this continues. I should also point out here that the Houthi statements say that some of the prisoners that were being held at this facility were possibly going to be part of a prisoner exchange that was part of the Stockholm Agreement. So if that was the case, that means that there were families who were preparing for, or maybe expecting, that their relatives, their sons or their brothers would be released as part of this agreement, and now they're just preparing for their funerals as a result of yet another instance of incompetence and disregard by the Saudi-led coalition.
Details are still coming out about this attack and why this prison or this facility was actually targeted. But in general, in terms of this war, does it seem to be under the radar of so many world leaders, and it's barely been mentioned?
It is still under the radar. It seems that Yemen has gotten more attention in the past year or so, but unfortunately that hasn't led to any real pressure being put on members of the coalition, primarily, of course, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And now with the fighting that we see in the south of Yemen, which of course deserves plenty of attention, it also means that unfortunately these continuous crimes and atrocities that are taking place in the north is now going under the radar. And it's important that we still pay attention to the ongoing deadly airstrikes that are resulting in the deaths of many civilians and to no end. And these airstrikes are really not accomplishing anything. They're not defeating the Houthis. It's just dragging this war on and making Yemenis suffer unnecessarily.
Hannah Porter in Washington, D.C., thank you very much for that analysis.